started having Joe Leahy edit Arrested DevOps. At first I was a little like, oh, like we do our cold opens and stuff, and I'm like, no, Joe is actually so good at those. Like part of it is having spent so much time with Bridget. He knows all the DevOps jokes.
That's good. You should always know all the DevOps jokes.
There you
go. You should always get the DevOps jokes streaming live on the internet. It's just nothing but live shit posting all the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody who's going to tune in, or if they're in the future and they're watching the recording. I'm Joshua Timberman, and I'm joined by Pete Cheslock and Matty Stratton.
We're here. We're back again.
We are here. We're trying to figure out if my son is going to be sitting and crying on the curb at the junior high, since he decided to tell me now that he needs to get picked up instead of taking the bus home. But I'm pretty sure he needs to get picked up after we're done. So if not,
that'd be good timing. Well, if it's 5 minutes away, he can walk, right?
Well, it's a 5-minute drive. He can walk.
Yeah,
you have to cross a pretty busy street.
Yeah.
I on the topic of kids and their cell phones, I think we bought a dumb phone, the dumbest phone, as I like to call it, for my daughter, who is 10, and it's like the last flip phone in existence that can operate on the 4G, because there's like one flip phone left that can operate on the 4G network. And I had to teach her what T9 texting was,
they were so excited to discover that. Yeah.
My kid was not excited. She was like,
they were. Okay. They had to point out why it was terrible, and then I had to explain T9, and they're like, well, this sounds really dumb.
It's actually really cool because you can text with one hand and you don't have to look. And I feel like we lost that in the move to keyboards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking for a phone for my son a few years ago, and I wound up just giving him my old iPhone 6 because I could not find the kind that I'd gotten for his older sister, which was this kind of, the keyboard slides out and you hold it sideways. But then otherwise it's a candy bar phone, right? Whatever that form factor was.
Yeah.
But that one was not a smartphone. It was, it didn't even have a camera on it.
Wow.
It did have a full keyboard. It was kind of cool.
That's actually kind of impressive that it didn't have a camera on it. Even like this crappy phone has a camera on.
There was stuff I wanted to get rid of on the flip phone that you couldn't disable stuff and whatnot, and because we did that because for a while. So just for context, so like my sons they're in 6th grade now, but like so last year we were always at first we're like they don't need to get phones until they're 13 or whatever, and because we're like they never go anywhere, they never do whatever, and then I moved into a house that's in the neighborhood where all their friends are, so now they like want to go to the park and they'd want to go sledding, so we're like, okay, you need to have something. So we did exactly like what Pete did, is got like the dumbest phone, the one dumb phone available from AT&T. And we're like, you guys share it. And I remember they were like, oh, how do I change the ringtone? I'm like, you don't personalize anything on this. This is not your phone, And in fact, it's the phone number for that phone is in my phone as burner. Right. Because I was like, this is their.
Well, that was the funny thing is I went through and I was like, okay, I've got the phone. I need a SIM card. Mm-hmm. So, and all of the SIM card, like the mainstream providers are like, it's pay as you go, except you're going to have a monthly fee. And I'm like, well, that's not really pay as you go, is it? And so I found one SIM card provider, I think it's called like True Phone, that is a pure like burner card. Like you get a SIM card with a phone number on it. And it's just like, it's a legit burner phone.
But then the problem we were running into is like they weren't keeping track of them, who had what, and then also now the boys that the two of them aren't necessarily together all the time after school because it's like the same thing like today. By the way, if anybody's curious, my son doesn't have to get picked up for almost an hour after this live stream is over, so he's
all right. Excellent.
Sweet.
But all the other kids are going to be coming home in a minute, and they'll
and there'll be chaos.
Release the dog.
Yes,
and. But that was the thing. So we're like, okay. And then we're like, well, we'll get you phones for your birthday, which is at the end of December. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was like, it's just annoying to me. Like, cause we run into stuff. Cause like my long story short, like my ex, their mom doesn't live in the school district, but she lives close. So they can't take the bus to her house. So a lot of times she'll be like, take the bus to dad's. I'll pick you up there, whatever. And like, I don't even know. Like, I'll know because again, I'll be sitting here about this time and I'll hear the door open. It's totally fine. But yeah, but like, you know, it was a week and a half ago. My son comes home and he's like, was I supposed to take the bus? I don't remember. Can you call mama? And I'm like, yeah, you guys are getting phones. Because then we'd have it where then she would call me and she'd be like, I'm there to pick him up. Is Henry at your house? And I'd be like, oh, yep, he's walking from the bus stop. So I'm like, all right. Amazing. I guess
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a thing. So hey, what's up, internet friends?
Hey,
mine.
Thanks for coming.
I haven't seen in a long time in real life.
Right? Yeah, it's been far too long. I don't even. Wasn't it? When was the last time we saw each other in person, Matt?
You and I. I feel like it's been
a minute.
Yeah, because Cheslock and we saw each other. Did we meet up for? No. What about? I feel like I was in Boston for something with Tom. And maybe you and I had breakfast together with Tom.
Oh,
that was a minute before COVID. You know, like the beginning of March. I feel like
it like a DevOps Days Boston? Maybe I wonder.
Oh, that was different then. Okay, so maybe it was DevOps. Yeah. Anyway, it's still even if it was a minute before COVID, that was like over a year and a half ago. So
right.
It's
been some time.
They get to see people at Kubecon. That was kind of crazy.
Well, yeah, I think that was the original idea of the conversation that we wanted to have, which was this your first in-person industry conference?
Sort of. I will give about 3 or 4 weeks before KubeCon, I went to Devops Days Houston. So that was my first in-person conference since Devops Days New York in March of 2020, which was like for a lot of us, that was our last conference, was at Devops Days New York, that we all got out of and like, oh my God, how did this not become a super spreader event? Because I remember we're all at this conference like, everybody wash your hands. Let's do foot taps because they'll be fine. And it's like, oh.
Foot taps. Oh my goodness. You're playing hacky sack too.
Right. So I went to Devops Days Houston, but Devops Days Houston was kind of small, which is good. I mean, like that's what it was, you know, so it was a good, also sort of a little bit of a warm up. So that was kind of fun. I saw a couple people, but KubeCon, yeah, that was the first, and it was for KubeCon it was small, but it was kind of just about right for what I think everybody needed, because I think there was about 3,500 people, which is maybe about a quarter of what KubeCon North America would normally be. So it's kind of all over the place, but like one of the things, so I spent a lot of time in the expo hall because I was there to do that. Like that was why I went there to work. And, you know, like some of my coworkers who also had booth duty and stuff. So like Kat Cosgrove on my team, like she's a CNCF ambassador. She was a track chair. So she had like KubeCon-y things to do. So we're just like, stop by when you get a hot minute, right? It's cool, whatever. And so I was helping out with that a lot. So what was interesting, and both of y'all have done Sponsor Life. So our events person back home was continually freaking out because she's looking and she's like, these numbers are so low, you know, because she's got a number to hit for scans and stuff. But all of us were like, but everybody we're talking to is high quality. Mm-hmm. Like, because it was like they were all really great conversations, because nobody came to KubeCon that didn't really want to be there. That was, you know, and then also there was an intentionality to even come to the expo hall. So we're like, yes, maybe you would normally have this like X thousands of scans, but you'd still only end up with 150 actual quality connections. We just had that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that is, so the booths were all pretty far apart because COVID, and, you know, we've all run Sponsor Life before. I was like, can we keep this? It was nice. Like have 6 or 8 feet between the booths, you know. It made the hall really big, which I understand. I run events, you don't always have the luxury of that, but it was kind of like, oh, okay, this is all right.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a scenario that I have so many feels for. You know, like you go to a DevOps Days, and I feel like they're usually pretty good about, like, you have a table, you get the table set up, and you kind of space the tables out. So at least you're not right on top of each other. But like an Amazon reInvent scenario is, you're just like, on top of each other, literally, especially if you have we're like, I don't work at Datadog. I don't have their 50 by 50 3-story, setup that, takes up half the floor. And like that level of like, conference wealth, right? I got the little 10 by 10 and it's like, it's way in the cheap seats with all the other 10 by 10s. And I remember one year I was there and we were very late to get we were like waiting for cash to come in so we could pay the reInvent bill. So we couldn't register until money came in. And we were like, got one of the last booths and it was just way in the back. It was packed next to a bunch of people. And we had like 3 people at our booth because we were a tiny company. And the booth next to us was like this large German multinational. They had like 20 people at their booth and they were just like spilling off into our space. Just like, this is pre-COVID. And I'm like, this is too many people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I spent some time at a couple of chef confs, as you all may know, and the size of the chef booth, it was always like right in the middle and it was enormous, like double-sided, for the whole, or I guess all sides. There was no sides. It was just like enormous. But I remember not really spending a whole lot of time being in the booth, and just like I would try and do booth duty, and then I'd end up getting pushed out by like all the other people that were in the space. And so like that crowdedness in this kind of climate with the pandemic just does not sound comfortable to me.
Well, it was one of the best parts of, I think, the last reInvent I was at with ThreatStack, which, shout out to the artist formerly known as ThreatStack, now F5. The last one I did for them, I was expecting to work the booth because that's what you do. You like work the booth. As if like you're someone who can speak intelligently about your product, even though like I ran the operations team, I wasn't even like a dev advocate type person, but it's like you can speak intelligently and you're a user because we use the tool. And I always expect, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to work the booth and I'm going to have 300 of the same conversations each day. And when they were like, nope, we don't need you here, go and write me 2 blog posts, I was like, see ya. I'm like, sold.
Yeah, totally. So Matt, what was it like being at Kubecon? Was it like high energy? Was everybody, super they really missed out
people
on
were
each other?
Freaking unhinged. That's the best way I would describe it.
Unhinged.
So Matt, I mean, like, not in a dangerous way, I mean, it was kind of this like, oh my God, like, again, it was like almost 2 years of holy crap, like people. And I was kind of laughing. There was like, because they had the wristband thing, like red or yellow or green, depending upon like your comfort level. I kind of walked around with the yellow and I kept a green in my pocket, although then I gave it to Angel from Circle because he didn't have one. I was like, fine. But my idea was like, it was yellow unless I explicitly told you were green. So like if I saw either of y'all, I would be like, all right, just like, we're green.
Was that sorry, was that the lanyard?
No, it was a wristband.
A wristband.
Sorry, I just realized I've been gesturing to my wrist and it's out of frame.
Oh,
because I'm on. Yeah, it was like a wristband. But like someone I know, I'm not going to name names, but they were walking around with 2 green wristbands on because they're like, I need all the endorphins. I need all the human contact. It's double green. I was like, that's risky, not COVID-y, but just in general, But
I would wear my Hug Ops shirt that I think John Allspaw might have designed the color scheme.
Yeah, he did that with the yellow and the red.
It's like yellow, orange, and red. And it's not like you were like, oh, cool, like Halloween colors, and you're like, somehow yet not.
So
I'm gonna wear that. I'm gonna get the double green bands and a sign or something. I don't know. Need it.
Yep.
But I think people were, I mean, the content, like I ended up, because I was in the expo hall, so I've been watching talks like after I missed a lot, but I heard people talking about them and then I knew what I wanted to see. There were like some banger talks. So like content was super good. People were really excited. I think there were a lot of, just also a lot of, I mean, it was all, I mean, hallway track is the thing that it is, but I think people were developing ideas, and I know I made a lot of connections of actually coming up with some ideas for things I want to do with Kubecon in Europe, the Valencia version. I've got some people I'm going to pitch some talks with, and it was just really, I've been kind of in this thing where I'm like, okay, I get it. Everybody hates virtual events. Shut the F up about it. Let's just keep going. And now I'm just like, yeah, but that's right. This is why this is where they go. And I just want to sort of, I think it was Austin Parker that put this in a really good way that made a lot of sense to me, because I'm a believer in one of the big advantages of with all these virtual things is there's a huge accessibility thing, right? There's a whole ton of people that either as presenters or attendees or participants that just can't go to the events, right? They can't get on a plane and go to LA or to Vegas or to New York or whatever. And so it's opened up those doors. And I really hope that we don't lose that. Like if I want to push a metaphor, it's like the return to work thing. It's like we all found out that, yeah, remote work was fine. All these jobs you claim you couldn't be done remote.
Yeah,
and now
totally.
as soon as there's the second that it's not required, they're like, get back to the office, forget everything we learned in the last year and a half. So I'm hoping we don't do that with events. But one of the and I was kind of like, yes, find other ways. But Austin put it this way, where he was like, there's a mind space change that happens when you say, I am taking myself out of my usual physical place and I'm going to spend a day or two somewhere else. And it doesn't have to be a different city, but a different physical locale.
Mhm.
And it does this psychological change from the physiological of putting you into a headspace that's different than what you're, versus when we're doing virtual, I'm sitting at the same desk where I do my work. And chances are I'm probably doing my work at the same time. I'm not focusing on learning. I'm not changing my vibe. So it doesn't mean you have to do that, but when you can do that, it can be really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, which is I think that's why, at least for me, virtual events have really fallen flat. Because it's very much like I keep using reInvent as an example, but it's very true because they have for so long made their content very easy and accessible online, right? And so to the point that you'll often hear people say things like, well, why even go to reInvent? It's like, well, if you're going to reInvent to attend talks, you probably should not go to reInvent. I'm like, if you're like, I don't like Vegas and I really don't want to hang around with a bunch of people and I'm just going to go and see talks. It's like, you actually probably shouldn't. That's not what it's for, right? But if you're like, I want to go in, take some workshops, I want to go get certified. I want to go check out the vendors. Like, what are people building that can help solve my problems? Like, it's like, or if you're like the flip side and you're like a vendor business day person and you're like, everyone on the planet will be in that one place. And this is kind of the hallway track comment, which is like, this is the opportunity to have more high bandwidth conversations than you could have in a year. You could have it all in a week, right? Because all the people are going to be there. And they're all, I love that point. They're all in the mental space. They're like, we're here to talk about this specific thing versus like, your kid's on the sidewalk crying because, you're chatting with us instead of, whatever.
If you tuned in late, that is not actually happening. I don't have to pick him up till after we're almost done. Oh, crap.
Uh-oh.
No, I just realized, though, I'm doing a panel 10 minutes after I'm supposed to pick him up for DevSecOps Days Melbourne. Yeah. Wow, this is fun. Okay. Again, welcome to virtual
you got
life.
it.
Yeah,
totally. So, how many virtual events did you do in the last, 2 years of the pandemic time?
So, it's hard. Like they all run together a little bit, right? Which is true for the physical ones too. I had a year or two when it felt like that too. I would say in the last year and a half, and okay, so this is where I always think is really funny. So for kind of almost the first year of the pandemic, which is most of it, so from March 2020 until March of 21, I wasn't doing DevRel, right? I was fundamentally, for lack of a better, I was a sales specialist at Red Hat. So conference speaking and doing that kind of work was not my main remit. It was also a little bit like when I was first at Chef and I was like it wasn't a side hustle, but it was like in addition.
Yeah, it was like solutions architect, sales engineer type.
But even so, I remember I said something, I was like, yeah, I didn't speak very much this year. I'm like, I think I only gave like 12 or 13 talks. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. So I think that is the number. I think it was like 10 or 12 that I did in 20. And then this year it's probably got to be another 10 or 11. Because because you can do more, that's the other thing too. Like we did have, like we talk about in SRE and ops land, like you have a constraint sometimes around the speed of light. Like there is a physics constraint around speaking at too many conferences when they're in person, because you actually have to maybe get on a plane and you spend time and you do whatever. I know in a couple weeks, it was like our events person, who, by the way, is Wendy, who used to work at Chef. So shout out for you, Josh. She was like looking at, she goes, "Oh," she's like, "You're speaking at this 2 conferences on the same day." And I'm like, "Oh, am I?" And then I was like, "No, they're actually a day apart." But it could have happened, right? You could do that. But that's also like back to that headspace thing. Then you're kind of being that, when that happens, you're being that speaker that I don't like, which is I'm not actually participating in the conference. I'm showing up, giving my talk, peace out, let's go. Which is so much easier to do in virtual than in physical. And this also goes back to my beliefs on why I think single track events are so much better. And there's a lot of things that go to that, which is also why, like, I'm, it's funny, like reInvent. This is yet another year I've managed to avoid having to go to reInvent. I have never been to reInvent. I am taking it as a badge of honor.
Never.
But I was so close this year to not getting away with it. And I feel like next year is going to really happen. Although I kind of felt like if there was a year to have to go to reInvent, the year when it's way smaller is probably better for me. Because I'm telling you, 3,500 person Kubecon, I'm like, ooh, this is a little big. Like, I like me a good, like 600-700 person DevOps days. That's right, where I feel like I can talk to lots of people. But that's something I have to get over. But that being said, this sort of goes into another like similar rant about virtual events. So there's the argument about recorded versus live for virtual, right?
Yep.
So I kind of love this because it's such a great illustration of work is imagined versus work is done, which comes up in a lot of other things we do. And for listener, if you haven't heard that before, I don't think I first was brought to understand it from the aforementioned John Alsbaugh. He didn't come up with this, but it's sort of that thing when you talk to people in an organization and they tell you how stuff gets done. And then you're like, no, that's work as imagined, but actually, how do you really do stuff? So one of the big arguments people love to give for like why you shouldn't do pre-recorded talks is they're like, well, the speakers can all like riff off each other. Like, Joshua like spoke in the morning and talked about this thing. And then Cheslock was 2 speakers. He's like, hey, remember this morning when Timberman was blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, but in virtual events, that doesn't happen because people are even more likely to just come do their thing and GTFO, right? And I will tell you, there is only one conference where I've seen that happen and it worked. And this is the conference that if you want to do a virtual event right, you should do it like this. And that's Deserted Island DevOps. It was, and it was the best conference, best virtual event of 2020. One of the best ones ever. And everyone will get hung up on the fact that it took place in Animal Crossing. It has nothing to do with the fact that it was a video game conceit. So the reason that worked for the riffing, just for anybody who's wants to do this the right way, note, I don't know that I even did it this way for my own events, is all the speakers, like you presented via Zoom, but all the speakers were in Zoom together throughout the entire day, just being quiet. And so in between talks, then everybody would turn their mics on and we could talk, but you were just sitting in a Zoom together, which meant you actually watched all the talks. It was sort of like, and it was like this virtual speaker room, and it was all really, really cool. Like I actually feel like from doing that conference, I made friends, which I've made lots of, all of us, I'm sure, have made lots of friends through doing conferences over the years. How many friends have you made? Like actual people where you're like, you are now my good friend because we met at virtual reInvent, right? Or whatever. It just doesn't happen that way. And it happened with Deserted Island DevOps because, and I don't think any of it was like, this is how I'm going to, anyway. The point is we're all doing it really terrible.
Do you think it was because of their usage of Discord? Like I'm a member of their Discord and it was, during the event, it was hopping, and even after, right? It was very busy, like really engaged, more so than I would consider even like a Slack group for a conference.
Speakers got really engaged with each other before, so it was almost like instead of normally you'd have like a speaker dinner where there wasn't a thing like that, but people were in Discord together and like working on their slides. And I remember like I saw it was kind of funny because I was like, oh, I'm gonna give my talk, and then I think it was probably even like Jackie Gridrod. Like someone was like, "Oh, here's my slides. Does anybody have a good font?" And I was like, "Oh wow, y'all like really went in on this Animal Crossing thing." Oh, okay, I better go fix my deck, and and it was like that interactivity amongst each other. So it's and I here's a counter example, the way most events do it. So you will have maybe a green room channel that you join, or a place, and it's like they're like, you better only come in here when it's your turn, get out, don't come back, say don't do this. And it's like, we've been a little bit like with the Cloud Engineering Summit we did a couple weeks ago, kind of would like we had some live elements to it that meant there was a backstage, and we just sort of would tell people like, hey, come in here whenever you want. Like when it's time for us to go live, like I'm gonna kick you out, but yeah, come sit in here and chat with me and Laura or me and Kat, and let's or the speakers together, like that would happen because they would overlap, right? Mm-hmm. So it would be like, I think this happened where it was like Tim Banks, he had finished his Q&A, and then the next speaker, I don't remember who it was, joined, and they like everybody just sort of sat there and chatted for a while. So look for areas to do that is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Have you noticed in terms of like online and virtual events, have you noticed a particular platform that is really good for having audience engagement? Like I've seen, so caveat is that I've seen a few of these where they use either like Hopin and everything is all contained in there, or they use YouTube and then Discord is the place where chat happens. Like what's your thoughts on that?
So first thing I'm going to say, and this goes back to so many things we would talk about with DevOps and work and stuff, is like the tool matters less than your intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Now there are no tool is going to solve the audience interactivity problem for you. Mm-hmm. So, and the more that the tool tries to do it, the harder it's going to be. So you look at things like, what's the one with the 8-bit looking characters? GatherTown,
yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's a cool idea and stuff, but like, again, it's not going to just magically happen. You're not going to be like, here's a way to do it. So when I've seen it work well is when the conference had intentionality around driving interaction and driving participation. Now, some tools and platforms make this easier. Like some will actually almost feel hostile towards it, right? Like you're like, this is just not going to work. So like the sort of YouTube video with the Slack group or Discord, like if you just sort of throw it up like that, you're just going to end up with not much. But I think we did a pretty good job. So when we did Devops Day Chicago virtual in 2020, that's what we were basically. Is it was all streamed on YouTube, and then we did everything in Discord. But what we did in Discord was that's where we did our open spaces through their kind of video channels. So there was a fair amount of that interactivity. And what I found, there was one platform we looked at that was like, oh yeah, we totally do that. We'll just it was sort of like randomly putting people together at tables or whatever. I'm like, that's not how open spaces work. I need to be able to pick, not just get assigned to like 3 other people and ice break with each other. Mm-hmm. So there is no platform out there, by the way, that handles open spaces the way we like to do them at events we've done well. Like you're going to have to, and the ones that think they are meant more for icebreaker thing. I will tell you just generally as a producer of an event and as an attendee and as a speaker, no disclosure on payment. Tallulah is really good. That's one of my favorites, especially as an attendee, especially if it's a multi-track conference. It's the easiest, like back and forth, like you can move around, you can do whatever, which again is a thing you can do in a virtual thing. You can be like, okay, I'm going to watch this talk for a little bit, go to the other one. But if you're really trying to drive participation, go back to that. That's what you're trying to drive is participation. So stop thinking about your audience as an audience or as attendees, but think about them as participants. And that's like the cheesy thing we've said at Devops Day Chicago since almost the beginning is our badges. The badges all say participant, not attendee. Yeah. And we're like, everybody, whether you're speaking, whether you're a sponsor, whether you're whatever, we're all participants and we build this together.
Yeah, and that speaks to the inclusivity of what DevOps Days is trying to bring too, like trying to make sure that people feel like they belong and that they are welcome there and that they're active participants, they're not just there to attend and observe. And
And
it's not that you have to speak up and talk and all that, because some people aren't comfortable with it, but that you're welcome to, and that's totally open.
think about it this way. Like if you look at the rules of a DevOps, so what's interesting is so much of the things to do things well in virtual are actually kind of the same advice that I would give to in person, especially sponsors. But if you look at whatever the 5 rules are to be able to have a DevOps days, one is there needs to be participant or attendee driven content. Doesn't mean it has to be open spaces, but it has to be something that is like, and this is why people like to have that, like, oh, a lot of times when you'll do unconference, like it'll be like, everybody put your ideas up in the advance and blah, blah, blah. And we all know why that doesn't work. Now, I will say trying to do it in the moment and a virtual platform is a lot harder because there's a disconnect. So there is something to be said for like maybe sourcing it a little bit earlier. But it's funny because like a lot of people, sponsors hate virtual, and because they have to change, right? Because you know what you can do, what doesn't work is throw up a booth and wait for people to come by you. That sure as hell doesn't work in virtual. But the things that I would recommend when people are like, how could I have a better sponsor experience at a virtual event, is actually the same things that I tell sponsors at DevOps Days, which is participate in the event.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean, look for every time somebody mentions something vaguely connected to your product in the Twitch or in the, in the Discord, and then like be like, hey, we have a thing. It's like, be part of the event. And you will actually reap benefit from that. And it's the same thing you tell people, like, again, if when you go back to virtual and you're at a community event like a DevOps Days, and if you're just going to park your butt behind that booth all day, you're not going to get, that interaction.
Indeed.
Where do you think, I always kind of think of like next year, we're reaching the point, like more people are vaccinated now, that kids are going to be able to get vaccinated, which might have been, a last holdout for a lot of folks actually going to in-person events again. But I kind of have this hypothesis that next year there's going to be a lot of in-person events, but they're not going to look the same as they did before.
I hope they don't. And we're actually, I had a conversation with so for DevOps Day Chicago, we're doing an in-person, our plan is to do an in-person DevOps Day Chicago in May. I should off the top of my head know what that exact date is. I don't remember. It's the week after Austin's, but go to devopsdays.org/Chicago. You can find out. But we just opened up our CFP a couple days ago. And when I was tweeting about it, someone asked and said, are you accepting remote speakers? And I was like, that's a damn good question. And it kind of almost made me mad at myself that I hadn't thought of it, because I've been banging this drum towards DevOps Days, which is like, when we come back to in person, hybrid is, I have all sorts of problems with that term when it comes to this, but our remote story around these events has got to be a lot better than it was in the past, right? In the past, we used to, like, you're lucky if you throw, like, actually, it's funny. Our joke was always sort of like, all right, we'll throw up the live stream, and like, Cheslock's the one who tuned into it. Like, I remember there was like 1 year for DevOps Day Chicago, we're like, Pete's the one that's watching. But not just because people would, but we didn't, like, all you could do was sort of watch. And we're like, no, we need to bring some more of that experience. Even if it's not, just because we've opened up the floodgates on that to be able to have people. Like, I loved that about DevOps Day Chicago in 2020. We said, we were doing a Chicago-based event for our community. And our approach to it was the same event we always did, but we got to invite our friends from all over the world to be part of it who normally probably couldn't. And it was pretty great. So anyway, so we kind of were on this thing about, like, when we were talking today on our, because I was like, well, if we're gonna accept them, I'm like, I kind of need to know this like right now, because I don't need to know how we're gonna handle it, but like our CFP form needs to have a thing where you can tell me you're remote or not, so we can figure that out. Because we even were talking it out. We're like, what you don't want to do is you don't want to end up where, like, because you want to be able to optimize and have a great experience for the in-person folks, and you don't want to accidentally create a program that's like 75% remote speakers and everyone's just sitting in the auditorium watching talks together. And it's going to be interesting, but I'm hoping we do this more. And again, the reason I don't like the term hybrid is because you are never going to be able to create an experience that is equivalent for
Mhm.
both remote and your in-person folks,
Mhm.
right? It's not going to, someone is going to, I don't even want to say suffer. It's just going to be different. And you
Mhm.
need to accept that and say, this is just going to be different. And you know what? Kubecon, I think it was a great example of how that could happen, right? Like but it wasn't, but at the size of KubeCon, you could pull it off. It wasn't even like a hybrid event. It was two events that happened at the same time. You had a virtual event, you had an in-person event with similar content. And I do think like the speakers, you would catch people catching themselves like trying to remember, like, wait a minute, that's right. There's 20,000 or whatever people attending this virtually that are watching me. I'm not just talking to the people in the room. So as presenters and content people, we need to think about that. And how do we create that experience? But I do think that the stakes are higher for being, it's sort of like the difference of being a distributed workforce being remote or being remote friendly, right?
Yeah,
I think
there's remote first and then there's remote friendly.
And I think for events, you want to be remote friendly and maybe even a little more than friendly. Like you want to be remote inclusive, but it's not going to be equivalent. And I think back to, again, I'm going to use a chef example, but I used to teach a lot of workshops when I worked at Chef and for customers, and they'd be like, okay, we want you to come in and do this 2-day workshop. And like 10 of the people are going to be in the room and there's going to be 3 people that are dialed in. And I was like, nope, pick one. We'll either have everybody in the room or we're all going to be remote because someone's going to lose, right? Because you can't do, you think about it different. I don't think we can do that with conferences. I don't think we can say, nope, sorry. But I also think we've learned a lot of the years of doing virtual. Like, to be honest, if you threw together like an in-person conference and you did things the way we did it in 2019 for remote people, I'd be like, no, man, sorry, not buying it. You know better. You know how to do this now. Everybody got good at this. So you can, your reason is not because you don't know how to do it. The reason is how do you do it? And still, I'll give an example like of how you have to think about things different. So our event this year is at the same physical venue that we did it in 2019. So we're very familiar with sort of how we would set things up. And our venue and our normal setup is not like big screen behind the presenter. We do big screens on either side because it's, I think it's actually a little more visually interesting and to not be inside of a giant video wall.
It's also more accessible for people.
Depending on where you're sitting. Yeah.
Yep.
But then we were like, but what if you had a 30-minute talk that was just on the screen? That's actually, you end up with this big empty space in the middle of the whole stage with nothing there. And you just have these screens on the side. So we're like, okay, if you're going to have remote speakers, you do things different. And I love the way, so Kevin Reedy is on my team for Devops Chicago. He's our AV and venue guru and is one of the people that started it with me back in 2014. And he sort of said, look, he's like, I want us to remember that this year for Devops Day Chicago 2022, we are not doing Devops Day Chicago 2019 or 2018. Like, it's different. But what can we do that is still the core of the philosophy and the experience and the spirit of these things? And this is happening to DevOps Days around the world. Like, this is even how we're finding as DevOps Days has grown, as the need for virtual, as all of this has happened, a lot of our ways of doing this sort of very loosely connected, pseudo-federated group of things doesn't work exactly the same way. Like, we have policies and approaches that are in place that like are different in the world that we're in now. And we all need to, one might even say continuously improve.
Yeah. So, so what can you tell us about? So that there's a lot about some DevOps days and some Kubecon, but what can you tell us about the Cloud Engineering Summit and how that went?
So I am super proud of it. So what we did for that is it was produced by Pulumi. I like to think about it as Pulumi was the ultra platinum Megatroid sponsor of it, but it wasn't a Pulumi events per se. It wasn't about Pulumi. We have our event in the spring called Pulumi Up, which is like our equivalent of like a ChefCon for HashiCon or whatever, kind of you have your, which I think are
your vendor conference.
Yeah, it's your conference, right?
Yep.
And so kind of the spirit of this, I don't know that it was done intentionally, but as Honeycomb did the similar thing with Olicon, right? There was Honeycon, then there was Olicon, right? So Honeycon was like, cool, we're gonna like talk Honeycomb shit because that's interesting. By the way, I don't know what your explicit tag. I should have asked that at the beginning.
It's fine.
Okay, cool. TVMA. But but then AliCon was just more about observability and stuff. And so that's what we when we were talking in the in the spring about this, we're like, for Cloud Engineering Summit, we want it to be this sort of more industry / community / like, I hate to say agnostic. It's not really that, but it's just maybe you like Pulumi, maybe you don't, or whatever. But we wanted it to be for people who are doing this work in the space of cloud engineering and very practitioner focused, right? Like very like, how do you do this stuff? And definitely have some theory type stuff. And so I felt really strongly about building a conference that I wanted to go to. And I need to spend a little bit patting myself and my co-chairs and Kat and Laura like on the back for putting together a pretty damn awesome lineup. I'm primarily concerned that next year they're going to want me to do it again. And I'm going to be like, oof, I don't know. I think I called in every favor I had. But we had all around, everything worked out exactly the way I would want it to, as far as the content and people's participation. And for where we are in the virtual world, like people are so burnt out on virtual. We had a much larger attendance, very engaged attendees as well, and participants. The couple of things that I just sort of stand out. So we had, kind of our opening keynotes. We had Emily Freeman, who was talking about like her new SDLC approach that we've probably seen a bunch of places now because she's been talking about it a lot. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We did so Joe Duffy, who's Pulumi's founder, like he sat and he did a fireside chat with Kelsey Hightower that was really interesting, and there were some interesting contrasts. And then we were multi-track, which also made this whole thing like it was so many people, right? Because there were like 7 speakers in 3 tracks. There were like 20 plus talks in a 1-day event. Which thank goodness everything's recorded. And because I will say this, because we pre-recorded most everything, all the talks were available on YouTube about 10 minutes after the event was over.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Because guess what? They were already there. All I had to do was
you said to publish them.
Yeah. But what we did, we did a very similar approach to no surprise to how we did the virtual Devops Day Chicago, which was the talks were pre-recorded, but they were followed by a live fireside chat with the speaker, which could have been either taking questions from the audience, from people in the channel, or, the host was kind of chatting. And I really like that also as a speaker and as a experience, like all around, because the cool thing about recorded stuff as a speaker is you get to sit and be in the chat with participants while your talk is happening. And you can have a whole conversation that you could, again, it would be the rudest thing in the world for Cheslock to be up there talking. Josh was like, by the way, excuse me, I have a question. How did you come up with that idea or whatever?
Yeah,
and you're like,
totally.
Dude, shut up. But it's like, but you can do it. And I'll tell you, this is more of a comment than a question, is actually, wow, no pun intended on using actually there, is okay in this sense. Because the reason this is more of a comment than a question is so bad in real in-person Q&A is it takes focus.
Mm-hmm.
In a chat, it doesn't. It's actually really interesting, right? People are like, oh, well, you know what we did at my thing? I'm going to tell a story. You're like, cool. And if I don't give a crap about your opinion there, dude, I can just literally, it's easy to ignore, right? Versus it's the focus of the entire room, like on a mic. So I really like that. We had one thing I was real excited about is, so Chris Nova gave a talk, which I think one of the main reasons that Kat and I are able to convince her to do it is she was like, when we suggested, it was like, because she's been talking about treating infrastructure as software and, blah, 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 a bunch of opinions about stuff. And we're like, hey, you said you wanted to get on stage and yell about this. And she said, is it going to be publicly available afterwards? And we're like, yeah. She's like, okay, I'm going to do it because I want something to point people to, right? Like, which is one of the powerful things about having really good recording of a talk of yours. You can say like, cool, go take a look at that. So anyway, Nova's talk was amazing. We also saw people kind of pushing some limits of, or taking advantage of the fact that it was recorded and that it was virtual, things you couldn't do. So a lot of times, and by the way, I want anybody who's listening, it's totally okay to make your conference talk virtually, you with some slides, just sitting like I am now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you have to go to high production level and think outside the box, your content matters. But it's exciting when people do it. So Jason Yee, his talk was using the Oregon Trail as a metaphor for exploration. And well, Jason lives in Portland, in Oregon, near the terminus of the Oregon Trail. And so he recorded part of his talk outside. Like it looked like a freaking the PBS special or whatever. J. Paul Reed, he had his talk interrupted by a Skype call from someone to then talk about what he was talking about. Like, again, all staged, but it's like, that's cool. And honestly, now I'm starting to think, I'm like, well, maybe you could even do that in a real life one, you know? Maybe there's things we can do. I mean, if you want to take this to, it's not about Cloud Engineering Summit, but I mean, we saw freaking GitHub Universe, like just blew us all out. You know, I mean, saw Emily's WandaVision thing, you know, Cassidy did some great stuff. So the thing, again, I think all that stuff is really exciting to see people push, but I do want to make sure that we cannot stress enough. Do not feel like that's required of you to be able to do virtual content. You don't have to, well, because some of us don't have Microsoft, GitHub money behind us to produce that kind of a thing all the time. So, but
it does allow for some innovation and some creativity, like the Skype call in the middle of the talk and that kind of thing.
Justin Garrison has been doing some awesome stuff. He did a talk. Geez, I wish I could remember what conference it was. He did like a talk that was like all TikTok. Like he did it like a bunch of TikTok videos.
Oh my gosh!
And yeah,
he's tapping into a specific demographic in his market.
Well, but again, it's like, but that goes to sort of the thing about like, yes, you look at like the GitHub Universe stuff, and it was like crazy over the top produced, having, you know, two Cassidys talking to each other and all this stuff. But then, yeah, you also look like Justin did some stuff where it was super clever and he did it all at home with his own stuff, right? It wasn't about having like huge production value, but thinking about something different, you know?
I think some of the best conference talks I've seen are like black text on a white background with no pictures. And, you know, it doesn't need a lot of words because I think, yeah, to your point, it's, you know, can you concisely get your point across? Are you talking about something that is engaging that people, I guess, want to hear about? It is always cool to see folks go above and beyond for some of these things, but also like, wow, the stress level, you know, Joshua and I talk about it a lot. You know, the stress level of creating a good conference talk to begin with is a lot. Then putting effort into stylizing your slides is like the next level on top. Oh, yeah. And then, you know, in the video production world, it's like, okay, yeah, now we've entered into.
Well, think about this. Like, I've often thought about like the dependency on slides, and even in person ones. And I, you know, you talk about some of them that just have, you know, black words on a white screen or vice versa. You look at like Schaefer, right? Andrew Clay Schaefer's slides are the default keynote black text on white. Yep. That's a Schaefer deck. Right. Or you look at Emily. Emily has amazing decks and they're just pictures and they're not diagram. You know what I mean? Like you watch when she does it but the thing that's interesting though is you sort of have to. So what I'm kind of getting at is like, if you're talking about virtual, like, yeah, look at like what Jason did. And like that and yeah, he's got crazy gear because he's a nerd, but you don't need that. You could have your kid take your iPhone and record you walking around the backyard talking about what you're talking about. Like, why not? Right? Why not just mix it up? And it doesn't require like hours and hours, you know, in Adobe Premiere and doing crazy transitions. It's just like literally, you don't have to sit at your desk. Like, do something different. Sit and have a conversation with somebody. Like, I don't know all the so I think that's more than anything else. Like, it's so easy to lean over into like, we have to do all this graphic design. We have to do all this really slick video editing. And that's all really pretty and nice, but like you can do the cool stuff like in the simplest way possible just by getting up and walking around. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. You know, kind of makes me want to do some more virtual talks now because now I want to do something different. He says he's got several to do. I've got one I'm doing for this DigitalOcean Summit, which unfortunately I have to do at 5 a.m. in a hotel room in Seattle. Because when I agreed to do it, it would have been 7 a.m. in Chicago, which is no big deal. But then I made a different plan, and now I'm like, crap. So that one will be a little harder to maybe mix up. That's going to be a little more traditional, I guess. But you know,
this is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of fun. So my last, I have one like, well, Sorry, I have one last question for you, Matty, and that is, how many different talks do you have in your pocket that you're ready to give it at different conferences, or do you just have like one that you modify and slight in different ways?
That's a really good question. I have an answer for you, but first I want to say hi to Doug because I see Doug Ireton in the chat. So what up, Doug? So I was just talking to my coworker Laura about this earlier today. We were talking about like talk planning for the year, and I said I have a talk I've given. It actually evolved out of some internal training I did at Chef on how to submit talks, and one of the slides says don't pread it, which was like don't be like Paul Reed. So Paul Reed has this tendency to want to write a brand new talk for everything he ever does. Now the fun fact is, all of Paul's talks are basically the same. Something airplane, something failure, whatever.
Wow.
Truest story ever told.
This is not said in a name dropping way, but just because if you're going to take advice, take it from Jez Humble. So I remember Jez told me years ago, he said, have one talk for the year. And he's like, you just keep giving that same talk. Now I don't do that because there's is a little risky. But what I like to do is every year because I also, I don't write anything till it gets accepted. That's the other pro tip. Like so also like if your CFP's like, upload your slides when you submit, I'm like, not me, bro. Because I haven't written this at all until you've told me it's worth my, because this is how you experiment, right? Anyway. Well,
and it takes like 2 weeks solid work to write a talk minimum.
And maybe it's not going to get used anywhere,
Exactly.
So what I try to do towards the beginning of conferences, so the beginning of the year, I'll come up with like 3 or 4 abstracts that I'm like, these are things that might be interesting. I'm going to start to pitch them. I'm going to start to see what happens, and they'll adjust. And the reality is, yes, you kind of will have, I kind of have 1 or 2 talks. Like any year I want to have a really solid session talk, like whether it's breakout or could be used as I like to have something that could be keynote-esque, and I want to have a really good Ignite lightning talk, to have in my pocket, and I'll probably keep those going. So if you think about it, like in 2019, I think I gave my quote zebra talk, the trauma talk. I think I've given that talk almost 20 times. And you know what the fun fact is? So this is the other thing too. I was like, oh, you got to do new content. I'm like, even in virtual, when people, because in reality, in physical land, most people were not like, again, nerds like us that go to all the DevOps days might have seen, Aaron Aldrich saw my zebra talk probably almost as many times as I gave it, and he actually still always liked it. But most people,
it's always the joke where you're like, oh yeah, that joke landed better in Salt Lake City.
It's true. Sometimes it does. Oh, wow. By the way, yes, adjustments. If you're ever speaking in Salt Lake City, you do need to adjust your content. And Dr. Forsgren is very smart about many things, and she's also someone who can tell you exactly how to swear in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
Anyway, but yeah, I like to have a couple talks, and then they keep adjusting too, and so I look at again, to use the trauma talk as an example. If you compare one of the last times I gave that, I gave it at DevOps Day. Actually, I gave it virtually a couple times last year versus I gave it first at Redeploy back in summer of 2018. They feel like different talks to me. Slides are very similar. Content's very similar. But every time I would give that talk, I'd have conversations with people after. You see what hit, so you're like, or what wasn't clear. Someone's like, oh, I didn't understand that. You're like, oh, I need to rephrase that. Back to the thing with Aaron, it was the funny is there was a slide that had a typo on it. And every time I would get to that slide, I'd be like, damn it, I need to fix this typo. And one time he and I think it was DevOps Days Nashville, we're sitting next to each other. I'm going to get up to give the talk in about 10 minutes. He goes, did you fix the typo? I'm like, oh, thanks. Yeah, finally. So, yeah, it's,
good deal. Good stuff. Well, I think we're running out of time here, Matty, and I think you have a child that's probably sitting on a curb crying. No, he's not sitting on a curb crying. He'll be fine.
No, he's not. He's not even done yet. I have to pick him up for another 45 minutes, but
indeed. Well, thank you so much for your time. You're at Matt Stratton on Twitter and throughout the universe, I'm sure. Any last parting words of wisdom that you have?
Well,
for
I'm
viewers?
certainly never gonna.
Always be shit posting.
Always be shit posting. You should. Hey, you know what? I will promote. I'm not gonna be able to tell you much about it, but there is a pretty cool community event called Seagull that's happening tomorrow and Saturday, and DevOps Party Games, which is one of my silly little side projects. We're actually doing an episode of that with them at the end of the day tomorrow. But yeah, look up, it's SEAGL. I think if you Google it, you'll find it. They've got pretty good lineup. It looks like it's a really great community event. Excited to be a part of that. And
Awesome.
yeah, just have some fun with it. And hopefully we'll get to see y'all sometime soon. And
Yes, indeed.
not have to just foot tap. So
Yeah,
2022, it's happening.
yeah. All right.
That's
Well,
right.
hey, you know what, man? I'm just telling you. Also, yeah, you know what? CFP for DevOps Days Chicago is open. Sponsorship is open. So go to devopsdays.org/Chicago. Love
I'm
to
going
see
to go
your
there right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm gonna let Pete go there, and then I'm just gonna fly out anyway. And
Yeah,
he'll approve the expense report.
yeah.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's probably fine. All right. Thank
All
you,
right.
everybody. We'll
Thanks
catch you
all.
next time.